So I'm just gonna hide this fill layer in case that maybe later we wanna take another look at it and do some more trimming. But we can just hide it, so it's not affecting anything here on our texture. And we're gonna have a new fill layer. We wanna add a black mask to it. Actually, before I do that, let's just make sure that we have everything disabled here aside from the hide information. And now with our black mask, we want to add a fill layer here to it. And the fill layer, if you add it, it's blank. So now you want to search for grade. I already had that in there. So the one that we want to use is the metallic grade round. And currently we don't see anything. The reason is that on our hide, as before, we want to crank that up here. So now let's get back here to the fill layer properties. And let's go down here where it says tile. And we're gonna put that here to 16. So if I take a look here at that position, maybe we can crank that up a bit. Let's have that at 0.7. And then let's go up here to the UV transformations. Here we have a tile that basically does the same thing, but then we can further tile it up here. So I want to have that set to free. And that gives us this rather small pattern. And I'm also going to call that here small dots. So now let's right click and duplicate that layer. And this one I'm gonna call big dots. Now let's get back here to that and let's put that to 1.5. So that way we have two layers that do the main work for us here. We have the small size pattern and then we have the big one. However, there is one thing to consider if you're thinking like maybe we should have a third layer that is even smaller based on our reference image. There is something that we call the Moiré effect. And this is something we have to be aware of, especially for video games or any art really, like print media and also digital media, that if we have too much tiling, we get this sort of an effect here. So in order to prevent that, we actually don't want to have a third layer on it. We're gonna add a blur filter to make it more like our reference image, and that is the best solution here for that grip. However, before we do that, let's zoom in here and we can now see that the small dots are shining through the big ones. They sort of get merged in a weird way. And in order to fix that, we're gonna select the big dot layer and then we go to our hide channel only. So now if we put that layer here to replace, by default it's linear dodge, and then we put that to replace, we now have this layer here work on its own terms without any distraction from the one that's under it. Let me take another look here at the height information. But I think that was actually okay where it was. So I'm gonna leave it around there. So now what we can do is go back here to our mask. We want to right click it, add filter, and then here we have the blur in there. So at the moment we have too much of that. We can, by the way, also go here to this view, and that shows that it's basically all washed out, too much of the blur. So I'm gonna bring that down here. Let's get back to the material view. And it's still too strong. I'm gonna put it to 0.3 here for the big one. And now let's also add a filter to the small dots. And in here we can then also bring that further down. This is still too much. For the small dots, I'm gonna have it even smaller here, let's put it to 0.15, and for the bigger ones we have it at 0.3. So this makes this grip pattern look more like our reference. And now we can do more work here with our procedural textures. And let's get to those diamond patterns that we have here on different elements. So let's continue with this piece here. Our release. I'm gonna have a new folder and I'm also gonna call it release, and then let's add a fill layer. Let's add a black mask, and then to that black mask we're gonna have another fill. And now let's search for hexagon. We have different ones here, but the one that I want to use is this one. And now let's scale that down a bit here where it says tiling. So let's bring that down like this. And now we want to get back to our original layer. Disable everything aside from the height, and then we want to push it here into that direction. 0.15, and now we just have to add a black mask to the release folder, and then we can make use of the polygon fill mode here on the left side. We can remain here in the face mode, which is on by default. This is also what we want to use here by individually clicking on these faces here. So now what we can do is go back here to our hexagon fill layer and let's crank that up a bit, the tiling. I'm gonna have that at 60. And one thing that we can also do is change the rotation so that this aligns better to this edge there. That way it doesn't look so off-center. And let's try with 30 or maybe a bit less. Let's have it at 27. That seems to align quite nicely there. And what we can also do is change the offset a bit on that, so that once again this lines up a bit better there. So around here looks less cut off there. And now let's duplicate that layer. Let's call it hammer. We want to override our black mask, and then let's zoom in. We still have our face mode here as selection. And let's just also have this pattern on there. Let's take a quick look at the reference, and we can also select these two here. And then we still have the rotation on it, which in that case we actually don't want to have. So I'm gonna take that out here, put it back to 0. So we need that diamond pattern for one more piece, which is the one that connects this cylinder here. So we're gonna duplicate the hammer, and then I'm gonna call that folder cylinder piece. And once again, we're gonna override our black mask that we have on it. And now we can just make a face selection here on it. But since we have something here on the inside, I'm gonna undo that and then make the selection where we don't have the depth, or else it gets selected on the inner sides too. So let's go to our split screen view here, and let's find where that piece actually is. And now we want to go over here to our brush mode. So let's make that a hard brush, and then we want to put our brush settings here to UV, because we paint on it here in our UV mode. So let's make that brush a bit smaller, and I actually need it to be a black mask. So let's press X, and then if we press Shift, we can make a continued stroke up here that is perfectly aligned. So I'm gonna make it a bit smaller, and then also here on that side, let's take a bit away from it. And this is pretty much that pattern here already. What we can also do is go to our material properties here and increase that a bit. Make that a bit more strong looking. In which case maybe is a bit too much now. Let's take another look here at it in our viewport. And I'm gonna put it to 0.25. So we already did quite a bit of procedural texture work, but there is another case where we can make perfect use of it. Not only can, but we have to, in order to get this information in there. Same as on here at the upper part. So let's create a new folder, or let's just duplicate the old one. Lines rear side is what we can call that. And then let's override the black mask. And with this mask selected, we can then go over here to our polygon mode. And let's use the UV chunk fill on this segment here, which we were unwrapping as one piece earlier. Or you can also just do it manually if you unwrap that in a different way maybe. So let's change our fill layer. Currently it's set to hexagon, and we want to put that here to line. Filter for line, and then we can use this one here, gradient linear free. And currently we don't have enough tiling on that, so let's crank that up. Let's also rotate that around here. And then we still don't have enough tiling, so let's see what we can do here. And I'm gonna put it to 4. So now you can see that this screw needs some masking. So let's click on our mask, and then let's go over here to our brush, and we wanna go into our UV mode on the alignment, as well as here in our viewport. So now we just have to find this piece. In my case, it's down here. And then we can do some stamping on that. I keep forgetting to put the mask to black. And just make sure that it's perfectly centered. So now we got that piece, and then we can take care of the other one here also by simply duplicating our folder. By the way, if you press tab, you can go into the full screen view. So let's go back here to the material, and I'm gonna put it here to that direction. It actually shouldn't make a difference because it's simple black and white information, but I want to have less intensity on it, so it doesn't matter if it's this direction or this, but before it was a bit too strong, so I just want it to be a bit less here. And now let's duplicate that layer. Same as before, let's override the mask, and I'm gonna call that small. Let's go over to our UV chunk mode. Select this element here, and then with our face mode we want to put the mask to black, which we can do by pressing X. And then according to our references, we have only a small segment here where this is actually showing like that. So now of course we have to go back here into the fill settings and put the rotation to 90. So this works quite well there. And then we can also make use of this for the inner barrel. So what we want to achieve is this famous look here that we all know from the James Bond movies. And I couldn't find much references for this specific revolver. But let's just do something that looks, for example, like this here, which also appears to be a revolver. And for that, let's also duplicate that layer. Let's give it a proper name. And then same as before, let's override our mask. And then with our UV chunk fill, let's select this here. And then in our properties, let's go to our tiling and let's put that down to 1. So now what we can do is change the rotation, and we don't want to have too much of it. And unfortunately, we have a bit of a line here from our tile, but there's not really much we can do about that. We can only try to minimize it. So I'm going to have it at 10. That way, at least it's sort of continuous. But this seam, we will just have to live with it. And it's actually not too bad. So now we have also some cool inner barrel information, and I think that mostly wraps it up here for the revolver as far as procedural information is concerned, or really any additional information we had to stamp on. So let's carry on. So let's continue with our scope, and we can hide the revolver and the flashlight so that we can focus here on this piece only. And let's also click on it, red dot scope, and then in here, let's create another folder which we give the proper name. So same as before, I like to put a fill layer here at the bottom. We can delete this one. And then I just want to make that here a darker tone, because now we're gonna add some text here, and we're gonna start here at the back. So in that case, I want to add a black mask. I still have my fonts open here. Before we use that one, I want to use a different one just to change things up. So I'm gonna have this one now. And right now I'm still in the polygon fill, so gotta get over here to the brush mode. And now if we click on that, we get this text here. And I want to stamp in lock here at the back. So let me get here into a better angle. And then let me take a quick look here at the references. Here we have one that says lock. This is not one-to-one the same scope, but we can use it as a reference, and then we're gonna stamp in the information here that we have as alpha textures. So let me just double check the size here for that. Around 5, maybe it's a bit too big. I'm gonna make it a bit smaller, 4.7-ish. So I'm gonna also give this here the proper name. And then what we can do is duplicate this layer. And let's add some additional text here. But this time we're gonna make use of our textures. Let me just double check which name. Reflex. If you search for reflex, then we get these ones here. And let's start by selecting this one. So let's get here into this view. And then we just want to make sure we stamp that on with the right alignment. So this looks pretty good there. And then here on the left side, we have this one. And then on that side, we have the right one. I'm just extra cautious to stamp it on the right way. I like to have this here on one layer so that it's easier to control. And then we can also add some additional logos. So let's also override the black mask. And then we can add a logo here. Sector effector. I came up with that myself. I even have this fictional weapons brand on some of the weapons that I'm selling on the marketplaces, Unity Marketplace and CG Trader and so on. For those marketplaces, even if the gun looks the same, it's still important to come up with fictional logos because they don't want to risk to get into some legal troubles. So this is just a side note. I've been reading up on this topic quite a bit, and there are even a few very famous video games that have the original logos on it and the original designs, and so far they haven't gotten any trouble. But of course, like a big company like Epic or Ubisoft, they would want you to come up with fictional brands, and they would also want you to change the weapons a slight bit so that they don't look one-to-one the same. But they would already give you the logos and concepts for it. So I just wanted to mention that as a side note. Meanwhile, I was stamping on this smaller version here of the Sector Effector logo. Let's create a new fill layer. And let's add a black mask to it. And now we're gonna add a QR code. And by the way, I'm probably gonna dedicate a full YouTube episode about this marketplace topic because it's something I get asked quite frequently. If you have your phone next to you, scan the QR code, see where it leads you. This QR code just adds another nice detail here to our scope, and some of these scopes actually have that, so we're also gonna have it. Just gonna have another look around, and I'm thinking this logo looks a bit small now, so I'll go back on the layer, select this logo, and if we press X, we can just erase now with the black information. Press X again, make it bigger, and then we just stamp it on here a bit bigger now. So that way we added quite a bit of interesting details here to our scope, and let's see what else we can do. And actually there's one more thing. Let's hide these two layers here as well. And now if we look at it like this, we can add some normal map information on there. I'm gonna have a regular layer for that. And now let's search for normal. And I wanna have this one here. So let's get back here to our brush. And we wanna go down here to material. And we still have to drag that into the normal slot. And now let's stamp this here onto that detail. And in that case, I don't even mind it that it has this soft surface to the side. I think that actually makes it blend nicely there. And that way we have some fake detail there for this red dot. So that concludes the scope for additional information. Now let's take a look here at our flashlight. So here on our flashlight, let's, same as before, also have a fill layer. And let's put it to a dark tone. And then actually what I want to do is go back to our revolver. And I want to right click this whole folder here. And then back to our flashlight, we can then right click and paste layers. So that way we already have some of these things that we can make use of. And in particular, this is the inner barrel, or these lines that we added. So I'm just gonna scroll all the way down, select everything else from that folder, and then we can get rid of it. So this one here, the inner barrel, let's add a black mask. And then let's go over here to our UV chunk fill. And now we just have some more alignment work to do here, which in particular is the rotation. So let's take a look at the tiling, which we might want to crank up a bit. Or on a second thought, now it's actually too much. Remember what we said about this moire effect? So I'm gonna have it somewhere around 80. And next, let's give that a proper name here. Button. Always good to have this with the proper names in order to find it quickly later on. And now let's add another fill layer. Text and logos is what I'm gonna call it, because I'm just gonna stamp everything on this one layer. So now let's zoom in here to the bottom. And then if we search for Flash, we get to these textures that we brought in earlier. And let's start here with this battery symbol. And according to this reference that I found, it's not actually perfectly centered, but it's a bit here on the side. So we're gonna stamp that in there, and then we can just continue with the other logos. So let's have this one here on that side. And then we go over to that side and we wanna add the other one here. Just a quick look at the reference and let's stamp it around here. And then there is a QR code. We won't be seeing it too much because most of the time it's under the gun, but at least we know it's there. So now let's also add some details to this screw that goes through there, and we're gonna recycle this button folder here. So let's duplicate it, and once again let's overwrite our black mask. And now what we want to do is go over here to our polygon mode, and with the UV chunk fill we select this area here, which gives us this screw look here. So let's go over here out of the polygon fill mode and back into our brush. And now we still have the stamp on it, so we have to go to the alpha and select our shape again. That's basically the default brush in Substance Painter. And now I can't use it because first of all we have to put it to alignment UV, and then we have to put it to a black by pressing X. Black color. And that way we are able to take away here from that mask. I know it's not the same as on our reference, but since we barely ever see it, at least we have a bit more interesting information on there now, as opposed to before. And here in those fill layer properties, we can also crank that height information up a bit. So let's add a new layer, and I want to drag that out of this screw folder. So this is just a standard layer, not a fill layer, and I'm gonna call it extra details so that we can also add some normal information here to that flashlight. And let's go over here and search for normal once again, and then let's see which one makes sense there. Based on our reference image, it looks like there's a bit of like a hatch where probably the battery goes in, or I'm not exactly sure what belongs in there. So let's just disable everything here on our brush aside from the normal. And then let's make use of this one here. So now you can see that the borders of it are sort of like cut off. So that's due to our alpha. We should put that here to a rectangular shape. So now if we have the intensity all the way up, you can see that it goes over the borders. All we have to do now is find the right angle on it. And I'm actually going to go up here in our properties and put that perfectly to 270. And with that, let's just stamp down here, perfectly aligned. And this makes a really nice extra detail where before we had absolutely nothing. So while we are on this normal layer, let's take a look at the reference, and there are some details that we can also add with these normals here. And I'm gonna scroll up here and look at these circular ones. So it's pretty much up to us what we want to use there. It might not be one-to-one the same as on our reference, but really as much as we have any information on there that sort of resembles it, this is already a win. So let's take this one here, the bump border, and then I want to turn on the wireframe under our display settings. So with that enabled, actually that didn't really help because we don't have a line going here through the center because we were paying attention to getting the best performance out of it and saving our polys. So we just have to stamp it in like that and sort of eyeball it. And then here on that side, we have this very small dent. And by the way, we can click 4 times, and that way it will also make it 4 times as strong. So I just repeat that to show you. And let's do the same thing here on that side. Let's stamp that in 4 times. It's such a small detail, so we just want to make sure we really have some strong normal information there. And here, same thing. And this one mirrors over to the other side, so we only have to do it once. And now that I look at it, the ones that we were just stamping in here at the center are looking a little bit weak. So let's just scale that back up. And then let's just stamp down 3 more times here. And the same thing here. So now we really have some nice extra details here on that. So this is all a part of our texturing here, even if so far we're only stamping in additional information. But the more of that we have, the more realistic it will look. So let's add another fill layer here. And this one, let's do some hand painting here. I'm gonna call it painted lines, add a black mask to it. And then with our standard brush, let's have it a bit smaller. We can leave it as a soft brush. We don't need to harden the edges because that will help us with our height information once we paint these lines on here. And just a quick look at the reference image. You can see that it has a bit of a curve to it there at the bottom. So in that case, let's also try to replicate that. And on a second thought, I want to turn the lazy mouse on. I actually already had it on just to show you where to find it. And that way, once we do our stroke here, we can then just continue at the bottom and give it a bit of a swirl over here to that side. Then we want to do the same here. Also use our lazy mouse for it. It requires a bit of Control Z to get that right. And now here at the bottom, same thing. And then a third line here parallel to this one. So yet another detail that we have on our reference image. And then with that, what we can do is go over to our properties of the layer and we can disable everything aside from the height, which we can crank up quite a bit. So now we have this detail here as well. So we're getting there now. We can almost start texturing, but I want to go back here to that red dot scope because this circle bump that we were just using, we can also use it here on that flashlight, and especially here in that area right now, it looks a little bit blank. So let's go back here and then let's see which layer we have here. This one was the one where we already had this normal detail here. So I'm just gonna call that normal details. And then let's just go over here and we can then stamp that here on top of the existing normal information. So it basically gets multiplied. And I'm gonna click 4 times. And now this has a bit more depth here. So there's one more thing that I want to do with the procedural textures, and that's to get some more information where we have these holes right now. So let's go back to the flashlight, and essentially the screw folder is the one that we want to copy for it, the one that has these procedural lines. So let's copy that folder and let's just paste it back in here. Now we're back here to our scope. And let's right click the mask, override it, and then we can go over here to our polygon fill and we want to use the UV chunk fill. So let's just select those guys here one by one. And you can see now we have a bit more information there already. Maybe we can go in there, let's see in our properties, and let's increase maybe the tiling to 4. So now this looks more interesting. And maybe right now it's a little bit strong on the height, so I'm gonna dial that back down a bit. So now that we added all these extra details to the flashlight, the revolver, and also the scope, let's get back here to our revolver, and it's time to actually get to the materials and look at our different elements and make them look as realistic as possible. So right now I'm still in the red dot scope tab here. Let's actually go over here to our revolver. And now let's take a quick look again at our materials and see how they compare to our smart materials. Here we have the default materials on the left side, and essentially they are pretty much the same in most cases as a standard fill layer. So let's add one, and in here we can then define the look of it by changing around our base color. In that case here I was just adding metallicness to it, so that almost makes it look a bit like gold. And here with our roughness, you can see how now it becomes way more shiny. So right now there's no wear and tear that comes with this material. You can see it's super clean. If we cycle through our channels, there's nothing else on it. And that is the same as if we apply a default material out of the materials tab here. So for example, the brass pure, you can see that it's almost the same as the one that we just made. So they just call them materials, but they are just predefined. And basically we can do them ourselves if we wanted to. Now let's go to the Smart Materials tab and let's apply, for example, copper. And you will see how now we actually have some information on here. If we cycle through our channels now, you see that almost every channel has some information in it. Because here, once we open the folder, we can see that it consists out of different materials already. And those already come with masks and with generators and with filters, so we can further adjust them. And it just helps us to be fast. Let's delete this. And now let's actually start to work on our bullets as a first thing. So for that, let's also take another look here at our reference image. And we can see that it consists out of 3 different materials. Actually, it's 4. But let's start by creating a folder here. And now let's make use of our copper smart material. So right now it overwrites everything because we don't have a mask yet. Let's add a black mask. Let's go over to our polygon fill, and then in the element mode we select everything here that is the bullet, and now we're gonna add another black mask onto the copper smart material folder and select only the bullet here. So now let's add a regular fill layer, and I want to make it a dark tone. And now let's also add a black mask to it. And then let's go over here to our split screen view. And I just got to find where that is. You can always change it to like a red color to see it better. Sometimes it's hard to spot. Let's also give this here a proper name. It's better that way, even though I don't do that all the time. Sometimes I forget. And now here we have this element where on the reference image, this thing has a black tip. So I just want to make sure I'm working on the right side. And in my case here, it's on the right side. And then I'm going to go over here to my brush settings and put them to UV. And then with a small brush, if we press Shift, we can make a small line up there, and that way let's just compare it here with our viewport. We get that here into place. Now again with our polygon fill, I'm gonna switch over to UV mode, because the way we were unwrapping that, we can then just select these individual islands here and also make it a dark tone. Now next, there are actually a few details on it, or this one detail where we can make use of our procedural textures once again. What I'm going to do is duplicating this lines folder here. This one really comes in handy quite a lot. And I'm going to call it lines bullet, overwrite our current mask that we have on it. And then what we can do is with the polygon selection, we click on that bullet. So now you can see it's only assigned here. And what we have to do is go into the properties and switch around our rotation. So there we go. Now onto that black mask, we can once again use our brush and start painting here, and only have it in the areas where we see it on the reference image. So a lot of the work is sometimes just to have a look at our reference and make sure that it's as close as possible. And for that, I hope you have a secondary monitor, which is really essential. So for this detail, I'm just gonna take a smaller brush and once more trim off a little bit there. And one more. Now it's perfectly straight. And let's go into those properties here. And I want to increase the tiling a bit to have a few more of those. But let's also dial down the height information. It's a bit too strong. So I'm just going to trim off a little bit more here. Back on our black mask. And now we can leave this detail here as it is. And we can start working on the next material. So let's work on the case here for the bullet, the casing. And first of all, let's get out of the normal and details folder back here into the bullet folder. Now I'm gonna use a regular material, not a smart material. And I wanna be using this brass. So let's apply a black mask to it. And then let's mask that out here. So now there's just one element that has a different material. And for that, let's use the steel smart material. So let's apply that. And in here, we have our different layers, and I want to actually make that a bit more bright here on the base layer. And then with a black mask and with our UV selection, we can mask this out here. So that way we have this element here in place. So now, because we used a default material and not a smart material on that case, there's pretty much the base in place now, but no actual information. If we look especially here in our roughness information, it's only a dark tone to make it shiny. So let's apply the Steel Medieval Stylized, and we're gonna make use of some of the layers in there. So this one here is gonna be the wear and tear folder for it. And as you can see right now, we have a base in there and we can delete it. Now we have two layers left, which is our wear and tear, the scratches and the wear here. So what I want to do is go into the material properties for it. We're in the base color channel, and I'm gonna bring that color down maybe to around 10. So that way we have some slight extra information. And now if we look at the roughness, we also have it way more interesting as opposed to before. I'm just gonna dial it back down a bit so that it's not super glossy. And now it's way more interesting as the one that we had before. Let's go back here to this dark layer. And earlier when I applied it, I didn't assign metallic information to it. You can see that here in the metallic channel. And now if we put that slider here to the right side, it becomes metallic as well. And now what that causes is that it becomes even more dark as before. So we have to compensate for that and make it a bit more bright. Just gonna have another look around here. But overall, this seems to be okay for now. Maybe we can still do some tweaks later on once we have the final composition in front of us. But now let's continue here with our grip. So let's zoom in and find a good view on it. Let's collapse these folders here so that it's more clean and we see what we're doing. I'm in the Smart Material tab and I want to be using a certain plastic here. As you can see, it already comes with quite a few. Let me just see which one that was. You can always try out different materials yourself, but in that case, the one that I think works great is this one, the Plastic Glossy Stained. And of course, we don't want to have it orange. But first, let's mask this out here with our Element Polygon Fill. Then I want to have our normal details on top of everything, or else we don't see our dots. Inside of the Smart Material, we can now cycle through these different channels that it comes with. And the base, let's put it to a darker tone here. And another thing that we can also do on the base is to adjust our roughness, which right now is a bit too glossy. So let's dial that down here around 0.5. And now let's enable our wear and tear layers that are on top of it. And those actually do a pretty good job. So I'm gonna even have a bit of height information here on that dust layer. And I think that makes it just look a bit more like actual rubber or plastic, and fits very good here for this kind of a wear and tear look that we have. Then we have this sharpen layer, but I'm gonna delete it. We can always apply more sharpening later if we want. The stains here have a bit of a different roughness information, and that's also what we want to give more contrast. So as the next thing, let's take a look at our reference image. We now did our grip here, And yes, it might not look as dirty as the one that we have, but let's not forget that when we do 3D art, we want to actually exaggerate things a little bit. This is something that is important to remember. If we do everything factory new pretty much, like as if it's shipped or handed over to you at the gun store, then it would look boring. It has no character. That's why we need to have wear and tear, you know, like little edge wear and dirt and oil stains. This is the kind of stuff that brings it to life, even if it looks really cool like that too. But for video games, we want to make sure to have this grunge and this wear and tear in place. So as the next thing, let's take a look at this reference image. And this is actually the only one that I could find. I mean, there are a couple pictures. You can find them in the reference folder. The only version that I could find where it's pure steel. Most of the pictures for this gun show with this coating on top. And it's really good to have this picture here where we can see what the steel under it looks like. So this is the next thing that we're gonna do. And later we will be able to basically export two versions. We have the one with the coating and then we have the steel version. And it's really simple. So let's do that as the next thing. Let's apply our steel. So we're already here in the Smart Material tab. Let's search for iron. And the one that I want to be using is the Iron Forged Old. Let's drag it under our grip here. This one, which by the way, I'm also gonna give the proper name. So here we have our grip, and now we have this Iron Forged Old Smart Material applied. And yes, I was just saying how we should have wear and tear, but this is definitely too much. So let's take a look at these layers, what this consists of. And then, oh, actually I'm in the wrong folder. I want to be here in the Iron Forged Old that we were just applying. And then we can sort out the things that we don't need or tweak them. This is basically the beauty of the Smart Materials. They already come with all these layers and we have them here ready for us to do adjustments to them. So when we look at that folder, we see that on top of everything, we have the sharpen filter. And like the name suggests, we gotta really zoom in here to actually see it because it's very subtle. It's sharpening everything. We can also increase that, of course. So if we really crank that up, you can see that now we have it set to ultra sharp, and it's the same as if you go into Photoshop and you keep sharpening your picture. So you can do that to the point where it's way over the top. So it's actually a good idea to have it down quite a bit. And in that case, I actually don't even want to be using it because we can always apply this filter on top of everything later on or even into individual places. And for now, to keep it simple, we're gonna just toggle it off. So now here we have the next layer, which is our edge wear. And you can see what an amazing impact that has. It looks really boring without it. If we put that on, it gives the whole thing way more depth as opposed to before. So this is a very important layer and we definitely want to keep it. Once again, because everything is procedural, we can also go back here into our generators. We can crank this one here up. This is the metal edge wear generator. And if we wanted to increase this, we could do that. But right now, I'm actually liking how this looks. But the one thing that stands out is that we have quite a bit of contrast here with the dirt and all that. So let's take a look here at the next layers. If we take a look at it here zoomed in, we can see that we have this almost leathery kind of a look, very scarred. And this is the surface details here. And it has some height information on it. I actually don't want to have that because it looks way too old and worn out. And even though we want to have wear and tear, we're not really after this look where everything is over the top, old school looking. So I'm going to toggle that layer off. Next one is the dirt layer. And this one is responsible for the main look here of this material almost. If we turn that off, we have a rather pristine look. If we turn it on, wrong layer, we have a very strong wear and tear on it. So the idea that I'm having for this layer is to actually adjust it instead of getting rid of it. So let's scroll down a bit here. We have our edges layer here. This one we can leave in place where it is. And now let's take a look at this dirt layer. As you can see, it adds a lot of information here on top of everything. But if we go into our roughness channel and we hide that dirt, we still have a lot of information here already. And I think that this is actually too much. So it's actually not the stains layer where this comes from, even though that also does a bit of extra, but not so much here in the roughness. This scratched information here is in the fill layer that's assigned to our base. And in that case, I actually want to disable that. I think this is a bit too noisy otherwise, and that's something that we also don't necessarily want to have. So let's disable that. This way we have roughness information coming here from the base and from these edges. And you can see how the edges are quite a bit more glossy as opposed to this layer here. So that would be a good time to look at our reference once more. And I'm actually thinking we should increase the roughness a bit here on that base. So let's go in here and I'm gonna put that here to 0.3. That way we get a bit more shine here, and also I wanna put a bit more brightness here into the color. So I'm gonna have it here at 0.27. Just brighten it up a bit. And now let's take a look at this dirt, which is pretty strong right now. And if we go into our channel information here and we disable the color, you can see that it's driven very strongly, not by the color, even though that also adds some depth to it. But if we disable the color and now the roughness, we see that it's a lot here with the roughness coming from that. So what we can do first of all, before we adjust color and roughness, we can also go here into our mask builder generator, and then maybe we want to have a little bit less. So let's put that here to, I'm gonna have it at 0.4. And then also I wanna go back in here, switch it over to our roughness information. That way we're only adjusting the roughness if we put that slider down here. So this one I'm gonna put to 35. Now let's go back here into our color and let's take a look at our base color. And I think that actually looks pretty good the way it is. So now we also have this stains layer here. Let's see what that's doing. Adds a little bit of extra noise to everything. So in that case, maybe it's also another layer that we actually don't need. I prefer to keep it simple. So let's just delete these two here, and that way we only work here with our base, the dirt, and the edges.